Hello, and welcome back to the Writer's Block. I'm Erica, and we're here with Jeff, Jonah, Mason, and Cameron. And we're going to be talking today about the stage of being an advanced beginner. There's a thing in the writing world where a lot of writing advice is oriented towards beginning writers. But if you work at writing long enough, there's this point where you reach a stage where you've heard all the beginning writing advice from podcasts and blogs and writing conferences you've attended, but you haven't quite broken it yet. So we're going to talk about what we think is the most useful thing to do or know when you reach this stage. Now, my thing is going to go without saying if you've watched this channel before, but find a writing group. I have 15 completed novels at this point. The first 8 I wrote in isolation. And for the past couple of years, I've been with my great writing group here. You can grow pretty far on your own, but you can only go so far until you share writing with an audience, and it makes a world of difference. So what do you say, writing group? What advice would you give to an advanced beginner?
I think the one that I would give is that one of the kind of milestones that you make when you go from beginning your journey in writing to kind of coming into your own is understanding what it is you want to write and fighting for that despite the advice that others may give you. It's really understanding what is a choice you're making that might not be the most popular thing in the industry and what is good advice to take. Because when you're a beginner, you really just want to get all the advice you can, to use Mary Robinette Kowal's writing excuses metaphor, was like assemble all the tools in your toolbox you can, so that then you can open it up and go, this is what I want to know how to use, and this is what I don't think is really useful for me. So I think the big milestone for kind of in that in-between space between beginner and published is understanding what is advice that everyone should use and what is your craft that you're going to be focusing on that needs to be specifically tuned for your purposes and not just general advice.
I would say in that same vein, once you have figured out what you are aiming for, I would say maybe expand your circle a little bit, see if you can kind of get out there and things to that effect. As we've discussed on this channel in the past, and as I think we should continue discussing, we're all very lucky in that we got to meet each other through Brandon Sanderson's workshop class, right? Blessed, truly. Oftentimes people do not have that particular resource. So my recommendation is to reach out, branch out, both on the internet, at local conventions, things to that effect, so that you can find other individuals to get your writing in front of. And if you already know what you're aiming for, you won't lose yourself in that process, right? If you do that too soon, if you start out by just sending your writing to every Jill and Jim and whoever else, that can be a bit of a problem just because you'll get contradicting thoughts. But kind of at this mid-level, I think it's a good thing to do.
Talking about sort of bouncing off both what a couple of you have said, one place that you can go looking for folks who are like-minded and looking for a group and folks that will give you some quality feedback. If you participate in NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month in November, which I think we've actually done a video about before, there will frequently be local meetups, local write-ins, essentially. Probably fewer of them now than there were pre-COVID, but I would imagine they're still occurring at least some of the time. And, you know, you show up at your local comic book shop or gaming shop or whatever the case is, and you go into the basement and there's 10 or 15 folks sitting around eating pizza and doing writing sprints. And that can be a good place to begin to expand your circle if you're not exactly sure where to start.
Tied to this, it's all tied together, right? But some of the things that we're just talking about is figuring out, you know, the type of writer you want to be, what you want to do. And I would say it's also important to figure out what that also means for your distribution, like how you're getting your writing out there. So not only how are you creating your writing, but also then how are you getting your writing, not just in front of fellow writers, which is incredibly important, as has been said, but your eventual audience. Are you someone that wants to be, you know, traditionally published? Are you wanting to go self-published? Are you wanting to go the sort of newer model of free publishing? and, really figuring that out for yourself and doing some research about what those different writers' sort of lives are like to a degree. There usually is information confined about each of these subsets. And then there's, marketing advice that you can be listening to tied to that, whether you're looking at certain podcasts or YouTube videos about, say, self-publishing, for instance, or like a Facebook group like 20 books to 50K. And so recognizing, what's my process for getting the words on the page, which, is a journey to figure out, what motivates you as a writer. So that's another big thing. But then also, how am I going to get my writing out there? Because that can then affect the type of stories you want to tell, how you want to tell them, so on and so forth.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'd also add that, Cameron?
Sorry, go ahead.
So I'd also like to add that as you're figuring out what you want to tell and how you want to get your stories out there, if you have a couple novels under your belt, it's a good idea to start experimenting with different genres. I began my writing journey writing primarily fantasy, specifically YA fantasy. And I've started to go, okay, I know how to write a YA fantasy novel. I can sit down and crank one out in a month if I want to. So if I'm going to learn and grow as a writer, what else can I do? So I've tried contemporary. I've just finished a historical fiction novel. I've written primarily YA, and now I'm going to try writing for adults. So don't try to do the same thing over and over again, or you're not going to learn anything new that you didn't learn your first 3 or 4 novels. Branch out and see what else you can discover.
One other thing to consider as you're sort of in this advanced beginner stage that we're talking about, as with any creative endeavor, getting noticed, getting attention, getting the big break, whether you're talking about traditional publishing or self-publishing and getting folks to notice your book and buy it, is going to require patience and persistence, right? You've got to keep writing even once you've got that novel that you feel like is great and you're putting it out there and you're sending it out to agents and query letter after query letter after query letter, or you're posting for free on some website and you're getting, a reader here and a reader there, but not much. You just sort of have to stick with it and keep producing, or else you're going to die on the vine, right? You've got to have your second, your third, your fifth, your 12th novel that you're working on and continuing with, because the big hit could happen tomorrow, or it could not be for another 10 years. And hopefully you're doing it because you enjoy it, and so you're going to stick with it one way or the other. But developing a bit of a thick skin and a sense of patience that can be hard to come by sometimes, but is absolutely necessary if this is something you want to be doing in the long run, because most days are going to be sitting in front of the computer and going, nobody knows that I exist. What am I going to write today? And that's sort of the game.
I hate being patient.
To that point, I do also want to say that is important regardless of what your approach to publication is, right? If you're someone who's planning on self-publishing, if you're someone who's planning on traditional publishing, assuming that your first book is going to be the standout is just statistically near impossible. And you are not the protagonist of the universe, despite what your parents told you. And so the odds of you being the one in a million is still 1 in a million. So be prepared, right? Be prepared to write more than one book. If this is something you want to do professionally, but also if you just want to write one book and get it published, great. Awesome. Good for you.
I'm going to go write 5 novels in secret and put them on Kickstarter, because that's definitely the best way to do it. Clearly.
Obviously.
That's the idea. I'll write multiple books. I'll just try to sell them all at the same time.
That's where the big money is.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Friends, do we have final thoughts before we close off this video?
What has been said, it's a process, it's a journey. But again, this is where finding what motivates you is so critical. Is it knowing that you're going to have a writing group read your stuff? Does that motivate you? to finish a chapter? Does having a deadline that you know that people will be like, why didn't you submit this week? Is that what's going to motivate you? Are you a more guilt person? Are you someone that likes the reward? Are you someone that wants to see a reader have that singular comment? Could one comment from one reader drive you to do another, 10 chapters because you're so excited that somewhere out there in the world you're not connected to actually likes your stuff? But it is through experimentation and putting yourself out there, like Mason was talking about, not just with fellow writers, but with readers, to see, what's going to motivate you to keep writing.
One last word of caution that I say from personal experience about the whole writing group thing: try to find a writing group who is at a similar level as you are, because before I found this group, I was in a writing group where I was more of an advanced beginner and they were more beginners. So the kind of advice that they were giving to me and to each other was just not tuned to the level of writing I was at. And so I was constantly either having to push back against them or just ignore them entirely, which was not a good dynamic for me and not a good dynamic for them, because it was a net neutral. Nothing was happening. So just try to get a feel for what other people's writing is before getting into a group with them, because it's always awkward having to leave super soon if you realize you're not a great fit. That's all from me.
And you don't want to work with people who are there just to power trip. So, it is very important the type of people you end up with in a group.
All right, thanks for tuning in. This has been the Writer's Block, and we'll see you next time, Blockheads.